Hello, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Victoria Beard. I've hosted once before this semester, hosted the seminar series when we had Bob Balder. It's really nice to see you all again. I'm a professor in city and regional planning. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Peter Little, who's a professor of anthropology and chair of the anthropology department at Rhode Island Rhode Island College in Providence, Rhode Island. And so it's kind of interesting. So many people, I was talking to Peter in the audience today, are students who are getting a master's in urban planning. And so you might be thinking like, oh, we have this anthropologist. We don't always have an anthropologist. I know you hear from a diverse set of speakers in this series, but Peter and I were talking before, and I just really think about this a lot in my own practice and in my own work, that a lot of the problems, a lot of the issues that we're interested in, they don't really sit in kind of the traditional disciplinary boundaries and the way that the university was designed. And so many of the problems, we need to work with people who have different approaches, different methodologies, different takes on things. They approach problems in different ways. So I just think it's really interesting to see an anthropologist who's concerned with issues of engagement and e-waste and advocacy and planning and policy come and talk to us. And Peter has written 3 really interesting books. You can read about them on his website, about e-waste. And it also does work in this area, does work in the New York area. So I just really kind of encourage you to engage with his work on the website, and I'll let Peter take it from here. Thank you so much. Oh, I was going to say one other thing, just a kind of a housekeeping thing. We're not going to do the talk back today. So Peter will give his talk for about 30, 45 minutes. And then if you have questions, this would be really the format to ask them. And we'll do a Q&A, and there won't be a talk back afterwards, just kind of giving people their time back on this Friday at this point in the semester. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Thank you so much, Victoria, for the very kind introduction, and thank you to all the other folks behind the scenes who get these things in order. And it's really, really great to be here, to be back in this neck of the woods. I actually went to my undergrad at Binghamton University down the road, and so it's very nice to be here. I'm going to try to talk maybe for 30 to 35, 40 minutes, and definitely want to make sure that we have dialogue. And I always find that it's really in that sort of dialogical sort of approach that we learn a lot about ourselves, about the topic, and it's also a little bit more fun to actually engage in conversation than just having a talking head up here. So that's going to be sort of the game plan for today. So as was mentioned, you know, I've written these 3 books, and they all in one way or another deal directly with what I might call sort of the anthropology and political ecology of global electronics. It's looking at sort of the toxicity and environmental health, politics and challenges of electronics production. It's also dealing with the health and environmental politics and challenges of electronic discard. And it's dealing with a lot of different interconnected issues that I think speak really nicely to urban political ecology in particular, as well as sort of the role of technologies and infrastructure in the global north and global south. And so I'm going to be mostly in this talk, of course, talking specifically about the one in the center here, but all 3 of these books are really sort of blood relatives, and they all tie together in different ways. And so I do have copies of them if people want to afterward take a look and peruse them. That's great, you can do that. So I'm going to be talking about the Bernie Matters book, which deals with the more recent work I've been up to in Ghana around the topic of electronic waste. And I started this project in 2015, and I'm going to be focusing specifically on a site that's been widely understood as the world's electronics graveyard. It's been described as the dumping zone for the global north's discarded electronics, this place called Agbogbloshie. and the adjacent slum settlement of Old Fadama. And what's interesting about the case of electronic waste in Ghana is that many folks, including myself, first learned about what was sort of unfolding in terms of the topic of electronic waste in Ghana through the circulation and mass circulation and ongoing circulation of these sort of really toxic hellscape images of mostly young boys in Ghana working in this Agbogbloshie scrapyard, burning electronics to extract valuable metals, many of which are very valuable and in-demand tech metals. A lot of the ways in which I think about my project here in Ghana is really kind of taking an anthropological and political ecology approach to thinking about the toxic tech supply chain and the toxic metals supply chain. And a lot of these images that get circulated around and have been the focal point of how the narrative of e-waste in Ghana and in the global south more generally has been framed. A lot of these images, of course, are pretty hyper negative. They oftentimes display workers doing sort of this dirty, copper scrap extraction labor with no regard for the air quality of the city and all these sorts of things. And I found in this sort of hellscape imagery and narrative a lot that was really missing about the lived experience of these workers. I felt there was really, and continues to be often, a very reductionist sort of imaginary around the topic of e-waste in Ghana. And so as an anthropologist, I'm kind of sensitive to trying to do something that's not that, even if I trip and fall sometimes and maybe perhaps recycle or repeat maybe some of the mistakes of negative representation of these workers. But what I will try to do and hopefully share with you all is a little bit more of trying to understand the livelihoods and lived experience of these folks and why understanding their identities beyond their labor in the scrapyard is important. So to start things off, and I often use this as an example and discuss this in the classes that I teach, talking about Agbogbloshie and the e-waste disaster situation as it's been described in Ghana, it's almost impossible to do it without sort of real visual imagery and to sort of try to somehow sort of transplant ourselves there a little bit to sort of understand this environment. Several years ago, I think it's only about 2 years ago now, there was a feature-length film called Welcome to Sodom. This is in direct connection to this idea of this place being an example space and place of Sodom and Gomorrah. This filmmaker did this film called Welcome to Sodom, and I just want to share the trailer to it. It's very short, just 2 minutes, but it provides, I think, a visual, sort of very quick visual appetizer to sort of really what's sort of going on there. But as I will talk about in this talk, it misses an awful lot about these workers.
Bosu Shami Yami, Mami Yami, Freedom City, Shami Yami, Freedom Town, Shami Yami, Freedom Country, Shami Yami, Agbogbloshie, Kati Sharongo. You are welcome, you are welcome, you are welcome, you are welcome, you are welcome. Welcome to Sodom, hoy. Welcome, Sodom, hoy. I'm a rabba, Sodom, hoy. Bella Sodom, horse at the pump. Every day, horse, for Sodom. Anytime, horse, for Sodom. Every day, horse, for town. Gotta go front, don't look your back. Sodom, go front, go front, don't look your back. So dumb, go front, don't look your back. So dumb, baby girl, Jamla Tony, make a you na nyanga. Sweating yama jam Tony, make a uni, baya, Jamla Tony, make a maran in a Joe, baya, welcome, you are welcome.
So this is kind of the more recent featured film and visual representation of what's going on here in Agbogbloshie. I'm going to be spending a lot of time talking about some of these workers, why they're there, and who they are beyond being electronic waste burners, and largely focusing on the extraction of copper. Surely it is the case when you go to this scrapyard, you're confronted with a lot of consumer electronic discard. And that includes a lot of different things. But a lot of what electrical waste and electronic discard that these workers are working with is this sort of real bundle of copper wire that you see to the left of the picture here, of the screen. A lot of these electrical wires are actually extracted from discarded automobiles and tour buses and of all the other types of electronics and things that we often don't think of as electronics. They're extracting, housing units of cars, junk cars. If you think of a junk yard, you often think of a car lot of a lot of abandoned vehicles. But when you start to unpack things and look underneath the hood of an automobile, they're basically computers and electronics on wheels. And it's not cell phones and desktop computers that we're talking about necessarily here. We're talking about the electrical wiring, really, that is really mostly sought after. And the Dagomba themselves, I'll get to in a bit, who are the group of people who are majority the workers doing the kind of work in this community, come from Ghana's northern region. They speak a language called Dagbani. But as I'll get to later in the show here, much of their identity as the Gomba is completely flattened or avoided and not even considered in a lot of these e-waste representations, even with the most recent feature film, Welcome to Sodom. Why are these workers engaging in the open torching and incineration of electrical cables to extract copper? Well, it's largely to do to the massive boom and what has been described as the new copper boom. Some of the folks in agencies and international agencies who are tracking the generation of electronic waste that they know on a global scale, which is measured in metric tons. We're reaching 90 to 100 million metric tons of e-waste annually. That waste has been reconfigured and thought of as a possible tech metal extraction and recycling and circular economy sort of opportunity. So why are the workers engaging in this burning of electrical wires? It's basically to extract these valuable copper metals and whatnot. And Agbogbloshie has been, and the workers themselves have been the focus of lots of different interventions. And one of the things that I've been up to in my anthropological work is kind of trying to track and understand and make sense of what intervening agencies and projects are, what are they doing directly to sort of assist and help out workers directly. When I got on the scene and came to Agbogbloshie in the summer of 2015, there was a international solutions-based environmental NGO called pureearth.org, which is formerly known as Blacksmith, actually founded by a former IBM executive, teamed up with this Green Advocacy Ghana group in Ghana to get these workers to literally stop burning. The entire campaign was about eliminating burning at Agbogbloshie. And they set up this electronic waste recycling center in the middle of the scrapyard. The idea was that they would encourage and try to lure a lot of these Dagomba copper wire burners to come to the facility to use these cable stripping machines and to feed these bundles of wires through these machines to safely extract copper without having to burn it. What I ended up learning was that this intervention was really ineffective, largely because it's a lot easier for these workers just to burn and really quickly extract the copper and sell the copper off to Chinese and Indian folks in the scrapyard who are purchasing those metals. And so they were kind of avoiding using this facility. But this eliminating burning Agbogbloshie became a real focal point, an ongoing focal point of Pure Earth and Green Advocacy Ghana. One of the main thrusts and intentions of the entire intervention was driven by environmental health protection. And it was driven by the idea that we don't want these workers to further expose themselves to all the toxic substances that they're getting exposed to in the process of burning. Epidemiological studies of workers in this community have shown off-the-chart levels of lead and cadmium in their blood, other brominated flame retardants, all different types of nasty things that come from burning plastics and copper wire. And the campaign really centered around this idea of Kona Nebad, which in Dagbani is burning is bad. And they encourage sort of a self-surveillance, of your health kind of campaign. And what's interesting about it is that the intervention, out of the roughly, the numbers are always all over the place, around 6,000 people who are in and out of the scrapyard each day, only 4 of workers who are members of what's called the Greater Across Scrap Dealers Association were hired to manage and oversee the machines. And so depending on whether or not these young workers or groups of workers had any affiliation or knew these managers of the facility, they would just avoid going there. They would just continue burning. And so avoidance of even using this machine was something that was more the norm. And one of the problems that they found was that the types of electrical wiring that these Dagomba scrap metal workers are collecting are small bundles of small diameter copper wires, which are almost impossible to feed through a cable stripping machine in any effective way. And so actually what it ended up doing, the pureearth.org and Green Advocacy Ghana teamed up with an electrical utility company that had larger diameter aluminum-based electrical wires that are used more for high voltage power lines to feed those through the machines. So the intervention itself eventually didn't even directly help or even work for the initial targeted population of Dagomba copper wire burners. Agbogbloshie has also been, and the workers and their bodies have been the site of environmental health knowledge production and science. And this is something that, as an anthropologist, I've always been interested in sort of how bodies and people and communities dealing with environmental health challenges become sort of a focal point of environmental health science to understand those issues. And in Agbogbloshie, it's been well known for a long time, at least since the mid-2000s, that these workers are dealing with serious toxic overloads connected to lead and cadmium in particular. A more recent research project conducted by a bunch of epidemiologists from the University of Michigan School of Public Health decided to sort of upgrade and think differently about their environmental health research in the community. And they actually, one of the ways they did this was in addition to collecting blood, urine, and maternal blood samples to understand heavy metal and other toxic substance exposure health outcomes in workers. They also equipped these workers with GoPros and encouraged them to wear these GoPros, for X amount of hours each day to sort of assess and categorize how workers were also engaging in risky behavior. And this was kind of considered for some of the folks on the team as as a way to extend or augment environmental health science research in Agbogbloshie. And they considered this to be sort of a quest for, and this is the article that kind of came out of their work, sort of creating and generating more high-resolution knowledge. They write in here, in a complex and formal work environments, wearable cameras can improve occupational exposure assessments, and in conjunction with monitoring equipment, identify activities associated with high exposures to workplace hazards by providing high-resolution time activity data. As an anthropologist reading this, I often find it interesting, ethnography and social sciences may offer, this other high-resolution source of knowledge that's kind of maybe a little bit more directed at understanding who these folks are, what else are they up to in their lives and livelihoods, and why that might be really important for understanding the lived experience and contextualizing the lives of Dogombas who are engaged in copper wire burning. When you sit down and talk to a lot of these workers, and this is just from interviews done in 2017, what's interesting is that workers often talk about lots of other things that are also connected to their struggles, right? Most workers will talk about burning and doing this type of labor to make chop money. In Dagbani, when you say you're engaging in chop money, it's basically you're eating your wages. You're just making enough to eat for the day. So chop money is kind of how they often talk about that. In their narratives of talking about sort of the illness experience of doing this e-waste scrap metal extraction labor, they often hint at food insecurity. They hint at trouble sleeping. They hint at, everyone hints at respiratory illness, discomfort, and those sorts of things. But there's lots of other things that they mention, and in those narratives we learn an awful lot as well. Also going on in Agbogbloshie and in the scrap metal environment here is just the general effort to burn and break down and do open incineration of all forms of discard. In this case, we're not talking about cables and wires and photocopiers and things like that, but tires. There's an entire different group of folks from Burkina Faso who are Frafra speaking workers who are in charge of tire burning. And what's really interesting is that a lot of this initial pure earth e-waste intervention that took place was focusing so much on the copper wire burners, but if you spend any time in the scrap metal yard during that intervention period, the largest fires, the largest plumes of pyrocumulus cloud activity in the area was as a result of the tire burning that was going on, a lot of which would happen at night, so it wasn't as visible. So the intervention and focus on sort of more recognizable electronic waste and discard as an intervention point is really quite interesting. Why not are they also focusing in on tire burning as another point source of pollution and environmental health concern? So these are some of the other things going on there. Workers are constantly dealing with the threat of eviction and displacement. Dogombas who originate and come from the villages in the northern region and Dagbon Kingdom in the north, many have settled in this region because of intertribal conflict in the late 90s and early 2000s. And settlement in the area is often a no-no among the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, which is basically the urban authority that polices around and makes sure that these informal settlements are in order and people aren't doing things they're not supposed to be doing. One of the things that workers, the Dagomba scrap workers, aren't supposed to be doing is setting up settlements and structures in the scrapyard. They're supposed to live in the adjacent slum settlement. And anybody who's found setting up a worker shelter or space to hang out and get out of the sun and rest is often evicted. And in this case, Al Hassan, when I came down to the work site one day, his shelter had been torn down and torched by the local authority. So this is a pyrocumulus cloud, a massive environmental health concern not started by the copper wire burners, but actually started by the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, the local authority. So who is to blame for being the point source of toxic pyrocumulus cloud activity in this city is an interesting question. The original Agbogbloshie scrapyard site has been completely demolished and leveled. The current president, Nana Akufo-Addo, in one of his campaigns, has been really trying to level and repurpose this land and area. And so they relocated the Agbogbloshie scrap site and yard across the lagoon in the Old Fadama settlement. But what has stayed behind is a health clinic that's overseen by Ghana Health Services. And what's problematic about this relocation of the site is that the workers now are burning even closer to where they dwell and even closer to the larger slum settlement where their community lives. The leveling of the site wasn't intended to stop burning, but there was some logic behind leveling the site and removing it to get it further away from a very powerful church that's very close to the old Agbogbloshie scrap metal site. And so the relocation of it has lots of local political sort of interesting issues going on that are worth mentioning and talking about, but I won't get too much into that. All of these workers in this picture on the right are mostly the workers that I've teamed up with and have been sort of following and hanging out with since my time there in 2015. They all come from a village in the north called Savulugu. Many of the workers who do copper wire burning in Accra and in Old Fadama often team up and work and work among workers and create worker relationships based on the villages that they're from. And so that becomes a very important part of the work that they're up to. Ibrahim, pictured here on the right with the green striped shirt, he's also featured in that Welcome to Sodom film that you saw. But there's a lot more to his life that I'll get into in just a bit that doesn't get represented in that film. Now, what about art? What does art have to do with all of this? And I realized that's a really important thing to highlight, given the nature of the talk and the invitation and the college that the Center for Regional, the talk's focus is. So my last visit in 2022 was really interesting because I ran into a project that was going on, and it was spearheaded by this internationally recognized Japanese artist, Majo Nagasaka, who was, he's really a well-known artist who has galleries in Hong Kong, I think LA, and one in New York. And he visited Agbogbloshie, and it inspired him to get very involved in a local art project that could provide some more direct assistance to the workers. What he has done is set up and invest in an art gallery down in the Agbogbloshie scrap metal market area, and he started a project where he has community members and many of their children collecting electronic discard in the area, and he makes art out of it. And then the sales from that artwork that he produces out of it, the revenue he generates from that, he directly invests back into the community. And a lot of the trust that he has built with these workers has been really interesting, and especially among a lot of the younger workers, seems to has had a lot more longevity and impact than these electronic waste interventions spearheaded by these solutions-based environmental NGOs. And so the sort of role or recentering of art projects as ways to take on the worker labor challenges of electronic waste in Ghana is quite interesting, and something that we might see changes to. This is sort of the gallery space. This is Ibrahim and Al-Hassan. This is just some of the artwork that children have put together, and and that is now featured in that gallery space. This is one of Majo's pieces of work that sold and generated a good chunk of change to be invested directly into the community. And I'll just kind of flip through some of these. The space and gallery space is overseen and operated by Green Advocacy Ghana, and just last month, one of the big challenges that they faced with electronics waste is the plastics. It's not just the wires and the heavy metals found right in these consumer electronics, but it's the plastic casing of a lot of our electronics that become a real waste management and recycling challenge. And so they've created a plastic waste recycling facility in this gallery space, and it's now has meshed with Majo's sort of art intervention project. And these are just some photos from last month in the facility. And what I find really interesting is that still this eliminating burning in Agbogbloshie is still in the background, is still sort of, or in the forefront of Green Ad and Pure Earth's approach. It's quite interesting because a lot of those same posters, were being used in 2015 and they're still using them today. And burners are still burning despite this intervention. A lot of these workers who are sitting here disentangling a lot of these copper wires at one time were likely burning. In my guess, and what I've heard from other workers, is that even these guys who are participating in this non-burning copper wire extraction activity are likely also burning on the side to make chop money, to make wages. So really what is going on is important to understand with that. Now, in sort of thinking about the problem the challenges and problems around the efficacy of interventions, one of the things that I learned a lot about in doing ethnographic research in Agbogbloshie has been that all the workers talk about, wanting to live back in the north, wanting to live back in Savulugu, in the Dogbone region where they're from. And this often is stuck out to me because a lot of the urban waste interventions are urban waste interventions among workers who foresee wanting a livelihood in the north, in the non-urban zone. And so for me, it's kind of been an interesting case of like needing to highlight and think a little and lean a little bit more into thinking about the sort of critical geography of e-waste interventions that are urban, but actually have much more of a hinterland impact, or could have a much more of a hinterland impact. And so what do workers want? A lot of workers, when I ask them, what do you need help with? What are your needs in the north? They want solid foundations for their homes in the north, because the rainy season's getting rainier, climate disturbance in the northern region, and this agricultural breadbasket of Ghana is dealing with lots of different climate change issues, and more flooding in their community in Savulugu is a concern. So more and more workers want investment in concrete and housing, and more stable housing in the north. And so this is just some images of those folks engaging in some intervention projects that I've been
50
involved in.
seconds, Kang Mar.
This doesn't look like e-waste, Ghana e-waste intervention work, but it is if you're talking to workers and actually absorbing and thinking about the needs that they're sharing with you and what they want to see happen. And I want to end with this slide because Ibrahim, photoed on the left and right here, has been the feature and centerpiece of lots of E-Waste expose articles. He's the centerpiece of this Welcome to Sodom feature-length film. Nobody in those journalistic accounts or film projects have traveled to his homeland, have traveled to the north, to his village where he's from. Ibrahim is also very powerful in his community because he comes from a Dagomba community that is very much, social relations are very much determined by the hereditary chieftaincy that he's part of. Ibrahim is part of a bloodline of drummers. This is his father to the right of him. He's Ibrahim Makarma, and in Dagbani, if you're born from a father of a drummer, it's a long bloodline of drummers. So this is part of Ibrahim's identity that completely doesn't get the focus of even the most recent feature film. There's also no emphasis on other things that stress out and that are focal points of workers' lives, like trying to raise their families and create a stable family life in the northern region as well. And I just share some of these images, and the center one I'll end with. A lot of people in Old Fadama and in the urban area of Agbogbloshie and Old Fadama settlement will talk about, how difficult it is to sort of do interventions because there's a lot of, the political environment is really unstable, and it's hard to sort of get projects to have sort of longevity and all these sorts of things. And what I learned pretty quickly from folks was that a lot of these young workers who come from this northern region really highly value the hereditary chieftaincy that they come from. And so any political decision-making that goes on is directly connected to these satellite chiefs who actually spend time and set up dwelling spaces in the urban area to sort of oversee and do what's called, sort of like satellite surveillance of their people. And the man in the middle picture here is actually the head chief of the Dagbon Kingdom in the northern region. And it was recommended to me by Ibrahim and many others of the workers from Savulugu in particular that said, if you want real buy-in and you want longevity in an intervention in Agbogbloshie, and you want to help the Dagomba people, like you need to have this a working relationship with the chiefdoms that dictate a lot of activity in the area. So I'm going to sort of stop there because I think we're kind of getting close to time, and I want to make sure we have time for lots of questions. And there's a lot of things I didn't get to, but hopefully in questions and our conversation we'll be able to flesh a lot of that out. So thank you.
Hey, my name is Justin. I'm a first-year MRP student. Thank you for your presentation. You went into detail about the in-depth biomedical research that comes from observing these workers in these informal work environments, but has there been any direct efforts to provide medical assistance to treat the medical ailments that these workers face? Thank you.
Yeah, well, one of the treatments or things that they've done is the attempt to relocate workers out of the scrapyard was one of the initial ideas, was to, number one, get them to stop burning so they can continue doing copper extraction, right? And that will avoid their exposures. But what that relocation effort did and what that intervention that was about using these cable stripping machines instead of burning, it sort of fell on its face. The actual intervention itself became scrap. Many of the workers, one of the ways in which they self-medicate, they also do self-medication, right? After a day of working, workers will purchase and chip in and buy like a large Fanta drink, and they'll buy Robitussin, essentially, a cough suppressant, and they'll pour that into a bottle of Fanta, and they'll drink that and share that as a way to deal with just respiratory illness distress. Some of the other things they do to avoid exposures, obviously not standing downwind from the burning. They will take breaks. I used to bring N95s all the time whenever I'd go. What I later learned is that a lot of the workers would use them when I was kind of there, but then they would like sell them, right? And so other ways of engaging in sort of, that doesn't answer completely your question, but those are some of the things that folks are doing. What a lot of workers also, there's also the age of these workers also matters. So a lot of workers will get out of burning and work in some other sector of the scrapyard once they sort of have raised to the ranks, you know. But a lot of it has to do with how much burning you're doing, also has a lot to do with what is your social status in the village that you come from to begin with. Like Ibrahim was sort of a boss of a group of fellow burners from his village. And so having that boss status in the scrapyard can also be a way to avoid having to do more burning. Instead, you can order people to go burn. So this is some of the other ways in which those sort of social status dynamics and play out, which can sometimes have impacts on exposure times and health outcomes. I didn't mention this at all, but you'll notice that a lot of this is a male-dominated focus in the environmental health science. It's a lot of focus on these men who are doing the burning, but alongside, every day, all the burners are hanging out with women and children who are selling food and drinks to them. So their exposures have also been the focus of some studies, but the bodies of the folks doing the burning itself has been often the primary focus in the environmental epidemiological work. And a lot of the women will not stick around very long in the areas and will leave and go back to market to collect more goods. So they're actually in and out of the space a lot more, whereas the men who are doing the burning are just stay there much longer. So their exposure time is a lot longer too. So those are just some of the little dynamics there going on that connect to your question, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you pass it down? Thank you.
Hi. Hi, my name is Luke Early. I'm also a first-year MRP student. Want to thank you for your talk. You mentioned at the end that a lot of these workers, their recommendation to you, at least in terms of like interventions, really required buy-in of traditional sources of power that were far outside of the actual burn site. What I'm wondering is, are the public administrators in places like Accra or other urban centers, are they aware of like well, I'm sure they're aware of like the sources of power that kind of lay outside, and like, are they trying to use that to make change, or are they trying to kind of work within an entirely separate political machine?
It gets even more complicated with an issue that, so this territory of Accra, this area of Accra is actually Ga territory. It's indigenous Ga territory. In fact, Agbogbloshie is a term for Agblo, which is a river deity, but it's among the Ga who are mostly in that Accra coastal area. That land and that whole area is actually Ga. And so with this settlement being largely dominated by Dagombas and Konkombas and there's other groups that came from the north in the 90s and early 2000s to settle that area, there's Ga like chiefs who oversee a lot of activity in that area, and it's now meshed with the Gomba chiefs and satellite chiefs who have set up sort of space and I don't want to say surveillance operations, but a lot of the workers are very aware of like the sub-chief oversight in the community, but there's also this extra layer where those Dagomba chiefs are also having to work in tandem with Ga chiefs who hold a lot of power in that old Fadama settlement. And how so none of these chiefs, you know, are going to University of Ghana, having international, like, you know, education experiences and these sorts of things, are not sitting at the seat of Ghana Parliament, you know, to make decisions, but they're a huge voting bloc in elections. In fact, in Ghana, it said that, you know, if you don't have the Dagomba vote, like, you're going to lose your election. And John Mahama, who was the previous president to Nana Akufo-Addo, comes from the northern region. And he was the one who actually passed the first e-waste legislation in Ghana's parliament in 2016. And it was very clear that, not that that legislation dictated this, but it's very clear that because of the number and influence of the Dagomba now in the scrap metal sector in Accra, which is a multi-million-dollar sector sort of economy in the area, to lose their vote, to do too much eviction of that settlement, to displace those folks is going to really impact the possible elections. And so that's some of the situation here. It's really interesting in terms of, like, public officials working for Ghana Health Services or the EPA. Very few of them are from the northern region. Very few of them I don't even know if there's really any that are Dagomba. They're usually from the central region, or they're from Accra. And so there's this tension in Ghana between the north and south, and there's always been this deep, long tension. And politically, that plays out as well. To have non-Dagomba managing Dagombas in the scrap metal yard is, I think, like an ongoing problem and point of tension. But a lot of the international intervening NGOs and those public officials who are connected with Green Advocacy Ghana and these other overseeing agencies, like, their ties and relationships with those Dagomba chiefs it's kind of unclear. And I think there needs to be more work on that to really resolve some of the needs of the workers. And yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your presentation, and my name is Jinny Xiao. I'm also a first-year MRP student. I wonder, are there effective model of community engagement in these e-waste management that ensure the voice of these marginalized groups are heard, and how can it be ensured that these interventions are both effective and respectful of local needs?
That's like the crystal ball question. Yeah, I mean, on some levels, like the work that I also co-write and co-work with another Ghanaian geographer, a woman by the name of Grace Akese, and some of the ways of, you can say, giving voice or playing up the narrative of the workers that goes beyond, like, the doom and gloom, negative e-waste narrative of the work that they're doing. Like, the work that we do in social science, I think, is leaning into and playing up a little bit more, like, trying the effort to communicate more of the complexities of their lived experience that goes outside the e-waste gaze, the toxic e-waste gaze. I think the second part of your question, how to sort of create more efficacious community partnerships, is that kind of where you were getting at? Yeah, I think you need more and more deeper, slower time buy-in among the Dagomba workers themselves, not more time spent, like, working with the government officials and intervening NGOs. I don't know, that's kind of, but you also can't not partner with those folks to get the resources to get a lot of the work done that needs to get done. But where the leadership needs to be redirected is among a lot of these Dagomba wire fire workers, but they're not considered really the leaders of where the conversation should go. They're considered oftentimes guinea pigs for environmental health science research. They're often considered just folks that are like sort of the worker bees of the urban scrap metal economy and that sort of stuff. They're not considered leaders in redirecting what types of intervention should take place. So I think more of the Dagomba worker buy-in and starting early, like with the younger generation of kids who are going to continue to keep coming down to the scrapyard, working with those groups is really critical. Working in the schools in the villages in the north would be another way to go about it too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, yeah.
Hi, my name is Julian Hartman. I'm a postdoc in the department, and I guess my question is about like what the Dagomba workers themselves think about the scrap metal economy that they're embedded in. Like,
Yeah.
and it seems you were hinting at some sort of gender division of labor and maybe an ethnic division of labor. And so I wonder, what they think about the scrap metal economy and if they have ideas for how it could be reformed to kind of disincentivize burning. Thanks.
Yeah, well, just to quickly get to something that's interesting, I never have met a Dagomba, copper wire burner who said, stop sending us your copper, your electronic waste. They never have said, don't, some of the intervening NGOs and a lot of the narrative is oh, this is a case of the global north dumping their spent electronics on the global south, right? Which is a narrative that gets really confusing when you're sitting and talking to workers who want to make more money from copper extraction of from those electronics that are coming in. The divisions of labor within the scrapyard itself are very much like social and material based. Like there's workers who are working with copper. There are workers specifically working with aluminum, iron and steel, and workers over here. There's workers who are dealing directly with going through chipboard, motherboard, sort of metal extraction from desktop computers. The sort of demarcation and social demarcation of the scrap metal work environment oftentimes is very broken down by the types of materials being processed or recycled or extracted from. And as I mentioned, there's also ethnic divisions. So there's a lot of folk Frafra from Burkina Faso in this area as well. And they're slowly getting into a lot more of the copper. And Dagombas and Frafra work very closely together. In fact, in Bogotanga, which is the most northern city of Ghana on the border with Burkina Faso, a lot of the Frafras and Dagombas work very closely together. And so it's a really culturally complex place, but yeah, it doesn't totally answer your question, but I think it gets to some of it at least. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nikhil. I'm first year MRP. I got a question about your ethnographic experience there. What were the challenges that you faced? And also, while doing your analysis, the kind of theoretical choices you had to make to come up with this presentation. So, and the book, of course. So I just want to know about that.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's always challenges, right? I was lucky to sort of have a friend from the University of Ghana who I knew back when I was an undergraduate student at Binghamton University, who was a really good point person and point of contact. So before I even went to Ghana and started to kickstart my interest in this, and I connected with Wazi and And I also connected with a professor in anthropology, Deborah Pello, who's up at Syracuse University, who had done a lot of work with the Gombas, specifically in Accra. She mostly worked in this area called Sabonzongo, which is a Hausa community just adjacent to this site. So I kind of took the lead in interest that they had and thoughts they had about contacts before going. But I also had read and got in touch with a social scientist who works, she's at Berkeley, and she's in like the data science university college there, I think. She wrote a book called, her name's Jenna Burrell, and she wrote a book called Invisible Users. And it's about youth and their involvement and experience with internet cafes in Accra. And a lot of her work was really the first, she has a chapter in this book, Invisible Users. It was really the first book that talked about electronic waste trades and importation of secondhand electronics into Ghana as a result of the internet cafe surge in Ghana. And so I mention all these things because in embarking on doing ethnographic research among the Dagombas and in Agbogbloshie, I reached out to other folks who had already been doing work in those areas, which is probably pretty self-evident, something that we do. But it was really informative and helpful for me because I didn't immediately like align with a government agency or align with an international NGO to do the work or align myself with some entity that had a project going on already there. I kind of went footloose and I went kind of with some freedom to sort of think about what types of social networks I could work with, and having like not having like an institutional affiliation with the University of Ghana, not having not just being there to click photos of workers burning stuff was also another like tactic. I thought I tried. Oftentimes the workers would ask me, and this is part of the ethnographic experience, based on how many visitors who had come and slum tourists who had come, through. They often would ask me, "Oh, like you want to take photos of me burning?" And they would. It was almost got to the case where it felt like they were burning just so I could take a photo of them burning and that kind of thing. And I did my best to communicate with them that like that wasn't really what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to learn more about what life was like in this environment and what's going on beyond that practice of extracting copper. The ethnographic experience in a pretty toxic scrap metal environment like this is also really interesting from a researcher perspective too, because I'm concerned about my health as well, working and hanging out and being in an environment like that for extended periods of time. So I often would, sort of during the day, would limit my time in the scrapyard. Also just dealing with just exhaustion, the heat and the smoke, and limiting my exposures was something I often was thinking about, which I probably wouldn't have to do if I was in some other type of research project. So those are some things that folded in. Being white, male, larger dude, among the Gombas who, my access to the men and to those worker groups was definitely a bonus, like in terms of like access and and I say that because my colleague Grace Akese, her experience as a woman doing research among scrap metal workers has been very different. Her access to those workers, being a Ghanaian woman, she's expressed a lot of challenges. And so, I don't know, those are just some of the things that are kind of off the top of my head, like I'm thinking about in response to your question. And certainly during COVID, there was a quick transition to like using WhatsApp as the primary sort of method for keeping in touch with the workers because I wasn't able to go. And so using WhatsApp as a way to keep the research ongoing was really kind of quite interesting and almost kind of recharged the project in an interesting way. And the types of things that were being shared with me through WhatsApp and as a method of documenting and attempting to sort of keep up to speed on a rapidly transformative place and space was really important. And so it kind of, that factored into sort of how I thought ethnographically too about this too. Certainly the pandemic was disruptive, but it also, this shift to sort of using WhatsApp as a way to keep in touch and keep informed of the ongoing transformations was really important too, so.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm Mandira, a regional planning student, first year. Sorry.
I thought it was somebody up there. You're down there.
Hi. My question is that we see the incentive for burning of wires is to collect copper. But what exactly are the incentives for burning other kinds of waste, like tires? And are these, the burning of tires, is it done, is it organized formally by other external governance bodies on a daily wage basis, basis? Or is it still done informally by the workers?
Yeah, the tire burning situation was something that this is actually ethnographic. I was told not to go talk to those frafra workers. And it was, the tire burning, from what I was told, is simply to reduce there's such an overaccumulation of tires in the scrapyard. And so that was just a way to sort of, the incineration process was simply just to reduce the volume of that material in the scrapyard. Alternatives to the burning of tires, people would use them for other things. Like, in fact, a lot of some speed bumps on some of the streets in Sabonzongo and some of these other areas around that part of the city. The tires will be cut and used to create speed bumps. But from what I understood, those frafra tire burners were mostly doing that to sort of really just reduce the volume of that in the scrapyard. And they also were using, they were also using the tire burning as a source of fuel for burning other things. In fact, a really important meat market very close to the scrap metal yard, a central meat market in this part of the city. A lot of the goats that they would slaughter, they would burn off the skin and the hair of the goats and then sell it to market where it's butchered. And they would use the tires often. They'd burn the tires and burn the goat hair off simultaneously with the tire burning. So there was sort of like this connection to like the meat market as well, which was all kind of frafra folks from Burkina Faso run. And so it was a very complicated side project to sort of, I could have gotten deeper into, but it's a very good question. And I didn't answer it, and I'm not answering any of the questions adequately, I'm sure, but that's one kind of response to it. But it is interesting that in the electronic waste, hazardous waste, solid waste legislation that John Mahama passed in 2016, tires are like included as the electrical and electronic waste legislation, largely because, I mean, I actually think tires, anything connected to automobiles is e-waste, because it's like they're part of the mobility. These electronics are all inside these machines anyway. So Um, I mean, tires also have metals in them as well, but it's not what they're kind of going after. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jingpeng Yang. I'm also the first year MRP. I was wondering the role of the local government. Could you talk more about how the local government put forward some policy to encourage them to engage in such a participatory activities? I mean, to some degree, the collecting electronic waste is kind of a threat to their health. And would these guys struggle with the benefits given by the local government, struggle with the benefits and their, the threat of their health? Would they struggle with that? Would they reach a balance of that and they finally choose to do such activities?
So like, what has the local government done to reduce the risks of the type of work that they're doing? Is that a condensed version of your question?
I mean that would the local government give some benefits for them to do so?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Haven't really seen that yet. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, some of the workers have been compensated, or for the risks of the exposures they're dealing with have been given not vouchers, but have been able to go to the local there's a teaching hospital, like not too far from Agbogbloshie scrap metal yard. For workers who are experiencing certain health issues, they can go to Korlebu Hospital up the road to be checked on. But like, what the workers need is cash. Direct cash transfers isn't something that like the government's doing for the workers. Workers are also struggling with rising rents and more like challenges of paying rents to stay in the slum settlement adjacent to where they're burning for copper wires. So housing assistance would be something that local government and officials could help out with more. A lot of the workers, when they saw this e-waste recycling facility be put in place, a lot of the workers would say, well, why don't you also use one of the containers that these are like these 45-foot containers. One of the containers that they had there was just totally empty, and a lot of the workers said, like, we should have like a health clinic in there. But it was like, no, like, that's gonna not work, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of the workers wanted an on-site clinic, a health clinic. But that wasn't the focus of this PureEarth.org's intervention. It was their solution-based environmental NGO approach was reducing burning. It wasn't to provide health care. But I don't see how those two things aren't connected. But at any rate, those are some of the things that the land that the Agbogbloshie original Agbogbloshie scrap metal yard was on was actually overseen by the National Youth Authority, which is a government agency in Ghana that oversees that land. And during this intertribal conflict in the north in the 90s, a lot of the exodus of many women and children during that time period, the Olfadama and Agbogbloshie land areas were kind of overseen by the National Youth Authority. But to my knowledge, the National Youth Authority hasn't done anything like to directly assist like the e-waste workers who are now like the large majority of the labor force in the scrap metal market that's on that land that they oversaw. So there's lots of confusion about accountability and who's responsible for assisting the Dogombas in this case. A lot of folks would say, well, it should be the chiefs and the Dogomba chiefs, should be helping out these workers more. But that doesn't seem to be working as a solution either. And in many places like this, once these NGOs start coming in, the state kind of steps back, says, oh, the NGO's taking care of that, or the NGO's filling that need, right? And so there's some of those politics going on for sure as well. And yeah.
Maybe I can just
Just yell.
I was curious about, just to learn a little bit more about the supply chain and the sort of kind of labor scheme. I mean, you talked a lot about workers. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about where this stuff comes from. Is it imported? Is it
Yeah.
secondhand discards? That sort of thing. And I guess that related to that sort of is within all these solutions that you're sort of quite critical of, what's oddly missing is any kind of attempt to formalize the process and therefore kind of capture this potential resource in some more so seemingly organized
Right.
way, right? So in a lot of waste economies, the move is either for municipal actors or private actors to sort of not only create, cleaner type centers, but to employ people to extract valuable material and send it on. So there's this interesting way in which it seems to be resolutely kind of informalized. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas about who that informality is, for and how that jives with the broader kind of global circulation.
Oof, yeah, that's a lot. The informality, I was reviewing a paper just yesterday for a journal, a Ghanaian worker, Ghanaian scholar who's publishing a piece that's looking at informality, and some of the rates are really astounding and perhaps common in other places. Less than 1% of electronic waste in Ghana is formally processed. It's like 99% of it is processed through the informal economy and informal sectors. And that's just one kind of recent factoid that kind of stands out in connection to your question. In terms of the supply chains and how is stuff showing up in Agbogbloshie. So there's a variety of different ways to answer that. So the majority, and this is not just the case in Accra, but you go to any major urban city, maybe in the global south, but I'll just speak from my experience in Accra. Workers go out and collect electronics and buy and purchase electronics from refurbishers or households, and then they bring those to the scrap yard. Container ships show up in the port city of Tema, which is east of Accra. These large 45-foot containers of digital donations or secondhand computers coming in from Goodwill Industries or the World Computer Exchange or some other third-party E-certified e-waste company. These 45-foot containers will come in, and 80% of that 45-foot trailer, 80% of those electronics might be refurbishable and sold on the market, and the electronics refurbishing sector in Ghana is huge. It's massive. But domestic collection of the waste that's showing up, the domestic collection of the wires from old buses and machinery that show up in the scrapyard is a more common. I've never heard of or have heard reports of this or people finding that these container ships are, full of pre-bundled electrical wiring, for Ghanaians to burn. All of that extraction of those wires is happening from machinery domestically. And the lead writer and thinker on the global trade in e-waste is this geographer, Josh Lepofsky. He wrote a book called Reassembling Rubbish. And his work is really fascinating because he really flipped the script on this idea that the global north is dumping all this stuff on the global south with regards to electronic waste. What he found is that no, the biggest situation is regional trade between Nigeria and Ghana, or in Southeast Asia. Like, more regional trades is where the bulk of trade is happening. It's not the EU dumping its stuff on Ghana. Most of the US's e-waste is going south to Mexico. And so, like, there's kind of the geography of the e-waste trade is something that's interesting. And then the script has been flipped about sort of the power of the volume of the regional trade in this stuff. But as I said, like, I don't know how many taxis or cars, end up, getting junked, on a daily basis in Accra, but it's a huge number. But we don't think of those machines as e-waste, but that's where the majority of copper wire extraction comes from the housing units, and those machines is often like a jackpot for collectors and extractors. And so I also wanted to mention too that the reason why Agbogbloshie itself in that region became such a hub for the scrap metal sector is because nearby there's a community called Aboseokai, which is this area of Accra that became kind of like the auto repair zone of the city. And it's really that auto repair zone area of the city that kind of started the seedlings for stuff they couldn't repair to go to the scrap yard, and that's kind of how it sort of started to grow. So there's all these other regional sector pockets that informed how the scrap yard and connects to the domestic supply chain of how things are getting there and how they're being, yeah. You asked some other things that are really important. We can carry on the conversation. This is for me, and a lot of issues are so complex, it's really in that co-thinking and collaboration that it's needed to sort of make sense of a lot of this stuff. And so, yeah, I really appreciate the questions, and I don't know where we are with time, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. Really quick question. Hi, I'm Peng Geng, also first year MRP student. And my question is, does local government have any future plan for this situations or?
Yeah, I mean, the future plan is to maybe formalize the sector more, but in formalizing the sector more, they know that that might require displacing folks who are, trying to keep the informal processing going and going strong. So the formalization process will likely lead to conflict that, as I kind of mentioned, might lead to sort of political instability because if Dagombas, like say you have 8,000 Dagombas, and who are ready to sort of become this formal e-waste recycling facility, which actually Nana Akufo-Addo, the current president, one of the pitches for his presidency was creating this massive e-waste recycling facility. But nowhere in that plan was it like, we're going to directly employ and focus, we're going to focus our goals on supporting the Dagomba e-waste laborers who are already doing work, right? Their idea was to create this facility and hire in experts from outside to sort of run the facility. And so the interventions coming from the state are often in tension with this idea of not further marginalizing the informal labor force that's already doing a lot of the scrap metal trade work. And so, yeah, and I think for a lot of the workers too, like it'd be really good to know like how, like what do workers think about the formal, like making this a more formalized sector? Like I don't know if like a lot of these workers want to go to a massive plant that's overseen, and it'd be a really important sort of project to sort of think about. I think a lot of the workers, the majority of the workers who start off in Agbogbloshie in the scrap metal trade, you know, are ages 13 to 18, you know? So there's sort of like, number one, a lot of these kids coming from like, especially the Ghana's northern region, the idea of being able to go, there's sort of excitement built around being able to be like, able to go and work in the sector and have, and to be able to, not, I want to say use the word goof off, but kind of have a little bit of freedom to sort of do this hustle work without too much oversight. There's some sort of excitement to that. And how a formalization of that sector might interrupt that would be kind of interesting to know a little bit more about too. But these are, a lot of this is sort of speculation, but it's part of it. There is sort of a youthful energy to getting involved in this work. And a lot of these workers come from, you know, agriculturally based, small farm, large farm communities in the north, you know. They don't want to spend all their time, you know, working with, you know, harvesting peanuts and corn, and like they want to go in the city, or they have connections and social networks in the city. So the push-pull factors, rural, urban, which people learn a lot about and know a lot about, are also things that lure workers to go and do this kind of work. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.